Hi, welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. Well, I wanted to talk about why, or at least cover some of the ideas behind why foreigners come and choose Filipino women for their wives. And I think that you have to go back to the basic upbringing of kids in the Philippines. And if you compare that, say, to the American child, in contrast, and especially in the news at the moment, is the idea that there is a culture of disrespect in the American children coming up. Everything is shaped by the historical happenings, and for whatever reason, children in America seem to be growing up in an atmosphere of disrespect. Now, if you look at the difference between say an American or Western, let's keep it to Western kid, and the Filipinos are brought up really quite differently. For the most part, they are, well, compared to the Americans, say, are brought up usually by the mother. Right, obviously there's the nuclear family, so mother and father, and perhaps grandmother and grandfather may have some bearing on it, but not always. The mother doesn't expect people in America. In America, the newborn comes, and the mother doesn't expect others to take over those personal, intimate. Feeding, cleaning, and just taking care of the infant. It doesn't get shared. Now, contrast that to the Filipino way of doing it. A Filipino will probably have her child in the house. Now, foreigners will usually have their child in a fairly clinical environment, in which they don't even touch the child at first. The child is taken away from them and cleaned up and clothed, and all of those things. That foreign hands are in contact with the child. As I say, contrast this to the Filipina. Now, the Filipina is all about being touched by family. And I'd like to quote some things from a very good book which you might decide would be good for you if you're coming out to the Philippines. I always get asked all kinds of questions about the culture. And boy, there is a book here by Alfredo and Grace Roses, I think it is, R-O-C-E-S. How would you say that, Beth?
What?
R-O-C-E-S. How would you pronounce that?
R-O...
Yeah.
Roses.
Roses. Okay, I was right. After all that, I was right. Sometimes it happens. So, this book, let me show it to you, called, appropriately, Culture Shock. And it is a guide to customs and etiquette, the way things are done. And it really is an excellent book. I refer to it often. I'm talking there. Now, when a Filipino is growing up, for the possibly the first 2 years of his life, he may never actually experience being alone, whereas a Western kid will come up and will be very familiar with being alone. So this has a tremendous effect on the way that a person thinks. So look at this as a way of doing things. See, the American child is encouraged to express itself even if it means losing points with neighbours and friends. It is directed towards its own age group and has little interactions with older or younger people. It must develop its own interests and use its own resources, seeking family support only as a last resort. Now, Filipino children, now, they actually are controlled, according to this book, are controlled by teasing. Now, I know that this is true because I see it all the time. Teasing. They learn to cope with limitations and inadequacies brought out in the form of teasing. So, from the teasing comes from elders or other children. Now, similarly, they are able to express objections or defend interests, disguising aggression or disrespect on the grounds they are only teasing. Now, very often, Beth will say something, and say, "Oh, I was only joking." Now, it's not that this is solely down to Filipinos, because, let's face it, everybody goes through teasing when they're a kid. But it says, teasing keeps children in line, making them sensitive to self-esteem, and thereby building awareness of the same. Teasing remains throughout life a basic tool for otherwise unacceptable expressions, for control, and for feeling out another's reaction. Now, when it comes to interacting with people, with others, interacting with others, you have this way of acting in the Philippines where they're non-confrontational, and we've dealt with this many times. This is a huge difference between the way that foreigners act and the way that Filipinos. Now, Filipinos are much more likely to let things slide and not do anything about something, which will often be perceived as quite cowardly in the Western culture. But then what happens is that people tend to get on better within any group when they adopt a less confrontational way of dealing with things. So, what you have in the Philippines as well is that it is a mark of the father's macho stud qualities, if you like, if he has a lot of children. So he's virile. It's something to be admired on. Plus, a lot of children are considered to be quite an investment. That's the thing, an investment in the future. Now, why would they do that? It's totally different in the Philippines, and it really is different in that children are not regarded as being the burden that they often are in a Western society, because children are brought up living usually in a very small environment. Most Filipinos have never slept alone until a very late age, and young men often stay with the family until they get married. So the thing about being alone is quite different in the Filipino mind. They don't like to be alone. So you also have this other thing where when the young men grow up, they become part of gangs. And I think that is called something like, what's the expression, Beth?
What?
What's the expression? Is it bacana?
What's bacana?
Bacana?
I don't know. I don't understand.
Okay, well, this must be something that isn't quite so obvious. But in the book, it maintains that there are, for what we would in the West would know as gangs, but these are small, tiny communities of like-aged kids. And they are respected within that group, but that group can also bring pressures to bear, and it all begins to shape the behavior and the way that a Filipino will grow up. But they don't grow up alone, and they don't have the same sense of self. They have a sense of self which is in relation to all of those around them. Now, if you think that, for instance, Beth was one of 10 children, and for many years, as that was growing up, now in her case, she never got to do the caring thing, but in every family, any child will take care of the one that is down next down. So if you get a kid who is 9, will take care of an 8-year-old, and the 8-year-old will take care of the 7-year-old, and so on. And that's how they grow up, being so nurturing, and which is a key for why Western men find that women in the Philippines are quite different, that they are more caring. That's how they've been brought up. My own sort of wry comment was that I would always see a kid and say, oh, a child with a child, because they take care of the next one down. Now, with these groups of the younger men as they're growing up, they start to relate to outside groups in this way, and they grow up in these gangs. Now, a gang doesn't have the same connotation as it has in, say, LA, where that can be down to doing all kinds of stuff that is criminal and violent and so on. Not always, of course, but that usually is the way that gangs in America certainly are viewed. Well, in the Philippines, it's not quite the same as that. It's a much more benign way of dealing with it. It's going out with the guys. It's more of a fun thing. They do things together. They go out and they, I don't know, they'll all go out down to the beach together, or and all of this comes in a sense of togetherness which does not exist in foreign ways of life. And so all of this is all coming to bear on the upbringing and the thinking of, it amounts to programming, doesn't it? And they are brought up in this way to care for those who are slightly younger than them. In the Philippines, it's not unusual to see young men walking along arm in arm, not arm in arm, but arming around the shoulder. And it's not because they're gay, it's because that's the way that friendship evolves here. They've been body to body a lot of the time for their entire life. So the actual feel of somebody else's body next to theirs, as if they're glued together sometimes, is not unusual to them. Especially when we go to take, say, one of the kids or any of the kids to school, we will see youngsters from the earliest age, right, from the earliest school years, where they're looking at, say, 5 years old, and they're walking along with their arms around each other. They just meld together much more naturally and without any self-consciousness or homosexual feelings coming into it. They're friends, and it's not unusual to have their arm around a friend right from being little kids, and you'll see it. All of this, I feel, and it's just my opinion again, all has a bearing on how the Filipina thinks about things. Now, one of the things that as a Westerner you might find comes as something as a surprise is that the idea that Asian women, in particular, now we're talking about Filipinas, are submissive and will be bossed around and do exactly as you want. No, that's not going to happen. Filipino women are actually quite dominant, and they run the family. Now, you will have instances where they don't know how to handle money, but they learn very fast. And when a Western man comes over, if he can let go, then he might find that this is a very comfortable way of living, because the woman will handle everything. For instance, if a foreigner comes over and has a relationship with a Filipina, let's say the ideal scene, they get married, and what will happen then is that the Filipina will just take care of everything, and all that the man will have to do will be to have major decisions which will be heavily influenced by what the woman wants, and he won't have to actually deal with very much. So especially in the case of any older foreign man coming over, and Filipinos get accused and foreigners get accused of coming over seeking a caregiver. Depending on how you look at that, it may or may not be true. I know that in the West, very often the dynamic in a marriage will be that one or the other is dominant, and if decisions are made by one particular partner, as they age, if the one who is dominant dies first, the less dominant is found to be lacking in many ways and has to learn all kinds of skills like paying the bills, balancing the checkbook. Well, that was the old days, wasn't it? But you understand that they have to learn again, and that's something that if you come into the Philippines to retire on your on your pension that translates into pesos very well, thank you, then the younger woman that you inevitably will end up marrying, because you can, will take very good care of you. And that is one aspect of an interracial and intercultural marriage that is a very attractive one for people who come over, and there is an exchange. There's an exchange that cannot be denied, no matter where you are in the world. The woman will expect security, and the man will expect to be treated like a king in some cases, okay? And in some cases it's true, and in some cases it's not. Well, I hope that this has cleared up a few of your ideas. I would like to deal with some of the other subjects that are dealt with in this book about the effect of what happened when the Japanese were in charge here. So that's another story, another video. Thanks for looking in. This is A Foreigner in the Philippines. Don't forget to like, comment. I believe that we are able to comment now, as we have been in touch with YouTube, and we have voluntarily disabled our comments, and now we go through them and we review the comments and okay them, which works very well actually, because we used to do that before anyway, because we didn't like to have the nasty comments anyway. So thanks for looking in. Bye for now.